I'd always been the kind of guy who saw the world in black and white, ones and zeros. My tool belt had a place for every wrench, every wire stripper, each piece living in its own assigned pocket. 23 years as an electrician had shaped me into someone who lived by the code, both electrical and personal. While other kids were dreaming about becoming astronauts or rock stars, I was taking apart my mom's toaster, figuring out how the heating elements connected. You know what I mean? That need to understand the mechanics behind everything. Working construction sites as an electrician wasn't glamorous, but it fit my personality like a well-worn work glove. Each morning, I'd arrive before sunrise, my blueprint rolls tucked under my arm, ready to map out another day of precise measurements and careful calculations. The hum of electricity running through conduits made more sense to me than most conversations. My coworkers used to joke about how I'd triple check every connection, how I'd spend extra time ensuring each wire was perfectly aligned. But electricity doesn't forgive mistakes. One wrong connection, one loose wire, and, well, let's just say I've seen enough accidents to justify my cautious nature. When you're dealing with enough voltage to power a small neighborhood, you've learned to respect what you can't see. That methodical approach bled into every aspect of my life. My apartment looked like an electrical diagram, everything in its place, everything serving a purpose. No decorative pillows, no artistic flourishes, just clean lines and practical functions. Even my morning routine ran like a well-oiled circuit. Coffee at 5:30 a.m., truck loaded by 6:15, first wire pulled by 7. But you know what's funny about life? Sometimes it takes a massive short circuit to rewire your entire system. Before that day on the Anderson building project, I wouldn't have used metaphors like that. My reports were always straight facts, voltage readings, connection points, completion percentages. Never would have thought about how the copper wires I worked with daily were like life's neural pathways, carrying signals that could either illuminate or destroy. Looking back now, I see how my obsession with control and routine was its own kind of prison. I was so focused on following the blueprints that I'd forgotten to look up and see the bigger picture. Who would have thought it would take a 277-volt wake-up call to make me realize there was more to existence than perfect ground connections and properly torqued lugs? I never gave much thought to what happened after we die. Not until that day, anyway. And it started on what should have been just another ordinary Tuesday morning at the construction site. I headed down to the basement electrical room to finish up the last panel. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I pulled out my voltage tester. Can't be too careful when you're dealing with the main distribution panel. Concrete walls were still curing, leaving that damp mineral smell hanging in the air. My fingers traced over each circuit and breaker label, maxim against the building's plan spread out on my fold-up work table. Everything checked out until I hit breaker 42. Something felt off about it. The previous contractor had marked it as inactive, but the voltage tester was picking up a reading. I pulled out my phone, using its flashlight to get a better look at the panel's interior. The wiring configuration didn't match what the label claimed. Years of experience were telling me something wasn't right. So I did what I always do, started my double-check protocol. First, I traced the conduit path, then I verified the wire gauge. Finally, I cross-referenced the building to electrical schematics one more time. That's when I spotted it. The previous electrician had mislabeled the circuit. What they marked as inactive was actually carrying 277 volts to the HVAC system. The sweat started beading on my forehead as I realized what could have happened if I hadn't caught this. One wrong move, one assumption that the label was correct, and I wouldn't be standing here telling you this story. That's the thing about electricity. It doesn't care about human error. It just does what it does. I was kneeling there in front of that panel, my voltage tester still in hand, when everything went sideways. Despite all my precautions, despite catching that mislabeled circuit, something else was about to go wrong, something I couldn't have predicted. I remember the exact moment it happened. I was reaching up to secure the panel cover when my elbow brushed against an exposed wire I hadn't noticed. My body went rigid as a current ripped through me. That mislabeled circuit wasn't the problem after all. It was a nicked wire hidden behind the panel, its insulation worn after years of vibration against the metal edge. The voltage coursed through my right arm, across my chest, and found its way to ground through my left hand, braced against the panel. They say electricity moves at near to the speed of light, but in that moment, time seemed to stretch out like taffy. I felt every millisecond of that current's path through my body. My muscles contracted so hard, I thought my bones would snap. The voltage tester clattered to the floor, its yellow plastic case shattering on the concrete. The smell of ozone filled my nostrils, mixed with something else, the sickly sweet odor of burning flesh, my flesh. I couldn't let go. That's the cruel joke about electrical shock. Your muscles seize up, keeping you locked in deadly contact with the source. The last thing I remember was the buzz of those fluorescent lights getting louder, drowning out everything else until even that faded to nothing. One moment I was being electrocuted, the next I was somewhere else. No dramatic tongue of light like you hear about in most near-death experiences. No angels or deceased relatives beckon me forward. Just a shift, as natural as moving from one room to another. I found myself floating near the ceiling, watching as my body crumpled to the floor. The first person to reach me was Dave from the drywall crew. He'd been working 2 rooms over when he heard the crash of my voltage tester hitting the ground. Through it all, I felt strangely calm, detached, like watching a movie of someone else's life. More of the crew came running. Someone was shouting about calling 911. Carlos, one of the younger electricians, started chest compressions while Pete, the site foreman, ran for the AED we kept by the first aid station. My body just laid there, skin ashen except for the angry red marks where the current had entered an accident. You know what was weird? I could see everything happening simultaneously. While Carlos was doing CPR, I could also see Maria in the parking lot frantically waving down the approaching ambulance. I watched Pete fumbling with the AED pads, his hands shaking as he tried to peel off the backing. All these scenes playing out at once like multiple TV screens in my mind. The strangest part? I wasn't worried about any of it. The pain was gone. That constant ache in my lower back from years of climbing ladders and crawling through crawl spaces vanished. Even my thoughts felt different, clearer somehow, like my brain had finally gotten a signal boost after years of running on low bandwidth. I tried to tell them I was okay, that they didn't need to worry, but of course they couldn't hear me. I watched as they cut away my shirt, applied the AED pads, and waited for the machine to analyze my heart rhythm. The mechanical voice announced, "Shock advised," and everyone stepped back, hands raised. My body jerked as the shock was delivered. Carlos immediately resumed compressions, counting under his breath, sweat dripping from his forehead. Through it all, I guess observed, floating there, experiencing everything with a peculiar sense of peace. As I hovered there watching the chaos below, something shifted in the space around me. Not a voice exactly, more like understanding flowing directly into my thoughts. A presence, vast and knowing, was there with me. In that moment, all my carefully constructed rules and routines seemed almost comical. Here I was, the guy who triple-checked every circuit, who wore 2 different voltage testers on his belt, who lectured the younger guys about proper lockout procedures, yet somehow I'd still ended up here. The present seemed to ripple with a something like gentle amusement at my realizations. All those years I'd spent creating systems, following procedures, trying to control every variable. I treated life like one of my electrical diagrams. If you just follow the schematic exactly, everything would work out according to plan. But life wasn't a circuit diagram. I thought about how I'd turned down Jimmy's fishing trips because they weren't planned far enough in advance. How I'd missed my nephew's impromptu birthday celebration because it wasn't on my calendar. How many sunsets had I missed while reviewing safety protocols after hours? The divine present wasn't judging me. That's what made it worse. Instead, I felt complete acceptance radiating from it, along with a kind of cosmic patience, like a parent watching their child finally grasp a simple truth. All my rigid rules and careful planning hadn't protected me from ending up here, suspended between life and death on a random Tuesday morning. I'd been so focused on controlling outcomes that I'd forgotten to actually live. Safety procedures were important, sure, but I've extended that need for control into every corner of my existence. Even my weekend routines were scheduled down to the minute. Oil change every 3,000 miles, grocery shopping every Saturday at 8 a.m., laundry every Sunday afternoon. The present seemed to pulse with approval as these insights washed over me. I felt a profound sense of, what's the word? Not exactly regret, but recognition. Recognition of how much life I'd let slip by while hiding behind my rule book. Tears would have streamed down my face, might still had a physical body. All those moments lost. Gone forever because I was too busy maintaining my precious routines. The weight of it crushed me, this overwhelming sense of a life half lived. But as my anguish peaked, the present enveloped me with something different. Suddenly, I was reliving that rainy Sunday when my truck broke down. I'd been furious about missing my scheduled maintenance window, but then Sarah from the diner had offered me coffee while I waited for the tow. We talked for hours as the storm raged outside. That chance meeting led to the best friendship I'd had in years. The present guided me through more memories, ones I'd almost forgotten. That time I got lost on a job site and discovered a hidden Vietnamese restaurant. The owner taught me about fish sauce while his kids played tag around the tables. Or when a power outage forced me to abandon my evening plans, and I ended up stargazing with my elderly neighbor, learning about constellations I'd never noticed before. Warmth flooded through me as each spontaneous moment unfolded. The present showed me how these interruptions to my scheduled life had actually been gifts, little windows where real living snuck past my defenses. I felt myself expanding with joy as I recognized the pattern. Every time my careful plans had fallen apart, something genuine and beautiful had rushed in to fill the gap. Like that morning when my alarm failed, and I witnessed the most stunning sunrise of my life while rushing to work. Or the weekend my power tools died mid-project, forcing me to borrow my neighbor's, leading to a backyard barbecue that became a monthly tradition. Love, pure and simple, radiated through me as I finally understood. These unplanned moments were disruptions to my life. They were my life. The present shared my delight, and together we basked in the perfect irony that my most precious memories were the ones I couldn't have scheduled if I tried. I'd never felt anything like this before. This pure, raw love coursing through my entire being. It wasn't the kind of love you feel for another person or even family. This was bigger, like being wrapped in the warmth of 1,000 suns while floating on the gentlest ocean. Every part of me tingled with it. You know that feeling when you're so happy you could burst? That's what was washing over me in waves. I couldn't even remember why I'd been so hung up on schedules and routines. These seemed ridiculous now, like trying to control the wind or measure starlight with a ruler. The present shared more with me, showing me how love connected everything. I saw golden threads linking every moment of my life, even the tough ones, weaving this incredible tapestry I'd been too busy to notice. Each thread pulsed with meaning, purpose, beauty. My chest felt like it would explode from all this, I don't even have words for it. The closest I can get is imagine every good feeling you've ever had, your first kiss, holding your newborn niece, watching a perfect sunset, all happening at once, but multiplied by 1,000,000. Right then I knew this was it. This was how life was meant to be lived, open to these moments of pure connection, embracing the unexpected turns, letting love guide the way instead of my damned schedule book. The present seemed to hum with approval as this revelation hit me. The love kept building, filling every corner of my consciousness until I wasn't sure where I ended and it began. And you know what? That was perfectly fine. More than fine. It was exactly right. Like I'd finally found the missing piece to a puzzle I didn't even know I was trying to solve. And then all of a sudden I was gasping for air, my lungs burning as if I'd been holding my breath underwater. The harsh fluorescent lights of the construction site stabbed at my eyes, a jarring shift from that infinite warmth I just experienced. My back was pressed against the cold concrete floor, right next to the electrical panel that had, my whole body trembled, not from pain or fear. That overwhelming love was still echoing through me, fading like the last notes of a symphony, but leaving its mark on every cell. I blinked, trying to orient myself. The same exposed wires hung above me. The same half-finished drywall surrounded me, but everything looked different somehow, more alive, more connected. I could hear footsteps pounding towards me, voices shouting in the distance. My coworkers probably, but I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed this moment, needed to feel the rough texture of the concrete against my palms, needed to watch the dust motes dancing in the beam of sunlight streaming through the window. Each sensation felt like a gift. The metal taste in my mouth, the smell of ozone in the air, even the dull ache in my muscles. They weren't just sensations anymore. They were reminders that I was here, alive, changed. That presence, that incredible love, had shown me how wrong I'd been about everything. Started to push myself up onto my elbows, my work shirt sticking to my sweaty back. The world tilted and swayed for a moment, but I didn't mind. For the first time in my life, I wasn't in a rush to get back on my feet, to get back to work, to stick to some arbitrary schedule. Instead, I just breathed, letting each inhale and exhale remind me of that infinite connection I'd experienced. The voices were getting closer now. Someone was calling my name, asking if I was okay. That was more than okay. I was awake, really awake, for what felt like the first time in my life. The paramedics insisted on taking me to County General, even though I kept telling them I felt fine, better than fine, actually, but protocol is protocol. So I spent the next few hours getting poked, prodded, and scanned. The doctors found some minor burns on my hands and a bruise on my back where I hit the floor, but nothing serious, no lasting damage. They released me that evening with some basic care instructions, a recommendation to follow up with my regular doctor. But the real changes weren't physical. That experience, it rewired something in my brain, in my heart. You know how I used to get annoyed when someone would stop me to chat while I was heading to my truck? Now I've catch myself looking forward to those little interruptions. Last week, Mrs. Johnson from the corner house flagged me down to ask about her porch light. And instead of giving her a quick answer, I sat on her steps for 20 minutes, sharing coffee and listening to stories about her grandkids. My schedule still exists. I mean, you can't run a business without one, but it's more like a framework now instead of prison bars. When Tommy, my apprentice, gets sidetracked telling me about his weekend plans, I don't cut him off anymore. Those moments between the moments, they're where the real living happens. The strangest part, my work's actually improved. There's this flow to my days now. Sometimes I'll be in the middle of a complex wiring job, and instead of rushing through it, I'll notice how the copper wires catch the light, how each connection fits perfectly into place. It's like I can feel the electricity humming through the circuits, reminding me of that infinite energy I experienced. I still keep my tools organized, won't have it die hard, but I've learned to laugh when things get messy. Yesterday, I spilled my entire box of wire nuts all over a customer's garage floor. The old Mike would have been cursing up a storm. Instead, I found myself smiling as I picked them up. Usually had time to notice how the morning sun was creating patterns on the concrete. Life's got this beautiful balance now. Sure, I still show up on time, still get the job done right, but there's room for the unexpected, room for those divine interruptions that turn ordinary days into something special. That presence showed me how all these moments connect, how they're all part of something bigger than my daily checklist.